Can everybody hear us out there?
Yeah.
I recognize Alex's voice. Bill, are you there?
Bill Driver, are you on the phone? Alex, you're on the phone?
Alex is on the phone.
Okay.
I recognize his voice, but I didn't hear Bill's.
We'll ask everyone to please mute your phone. If you're on the phone, please mute. Bill, is that you? Bill Driver?
I ain't found one.
Okay, thank you.
Wait.
Okay, it's 1800, so I'll call this meeting for the 3rd of December. Next will be Planning and Zoning Board to order. Can we proceed with the roll call?
Mr. Hogan. Mr. Bush.
Here.
Mr. Kerrigan.
Here.
Mr. Driver. Mr. Masters.
Here.
Miss Metcalf.
Here.
Mr. Piccolo.
Now, now that since he's on the phone, he's basically here, right? You know, he can can he discuss? Can he?
He can discuss. That's my
But if
understanding.
we go to a vote, he can't vote.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, do we have minutes from the last meeting, Adrian?
No.
What date was that? It's been so long, I don't remember.
That's why
when
I
it
don't
was.
have minutes, I don't know when it
It was October, wasn't it?
No.
October, wasn't it the
Was it
first?
October?
I think so.
October 1st.
Yeah, it was the very beginning of
I
October.
probably do have minutes
But
somewhere.
we need to develop something for that.
They're somewhere.
Okay, we've got a lot to take up tonight, and it's basically all involving the LDR and the comprehensive plan. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with them, there's two people we haven't had here before. I'd like to introduce them. Linda Shelley, down at the end of the table down here.
Hi.
She's representing the city as far as reviewing the comp plan that we've done from a legal perspective. And Aaron Schaefer, Santec, who's going to represent the city in developing the LDR. So they're sitting in attendance. We will ask them for some input tonight. The first thing we're talking about is an overview of the comprehensive plan. Now, both Nick, the city attorney, and Linda had an opportunity to review it, and they had some changes that they recommended to be made to the future land use element. Now, it's my understanding, Linda, that that was the only element that needed to be changed, that you recommended changing?
It is not the only element that we had some adjustments to, but the others were minor typographical type things, clarifications. But to be fair to Nick, just a few minutes ago, he sent additional comments. And so I will, at the appropriate time, mention to you the issues that he still has with regard to the future land use element.
Okay, why don't we operate this way then? You've already made those changes, is that correct, Laura?
I've made the changes as of a conversation that Nick and I had on.
Okay, so based on your conversation with Nick, let's go through the draft as we have it here.
Okay.
And then you point out the changes that he recommended be made and to why he made them. And we'll give everyone an opportunity to ask a question. If not, then we'll move on to the next one. Once we're complete with that, then Linda will go down to you and let you bring up what Nick has added on to it.
That'd be fine.
Well, this document you have in front of you also includes Linda's comments too.
Okay.
So for example, go to the first policy, 1.1.3. This policy was rewritten to better understand what the intent was, and this came to light by Linda, and then as Nick and I were looking at it, it made a lot of sense of the comments that she was making. So this was to establish how you determine density and how you measure that.
Okay, any questions?
1.1.3?
1.1.3.
Yep, the highlighted one right here.
Yeah, it's a little wordsmithing needs to be done. If I read that one. Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't see the word refer. Shall refer, okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, well,
To each one of the land use categories, we've added the word gross on the density subsection.
okay. Anybody issue question on that? Okay.
On residential.
How about in quadruplex?
Yeah, we added that on residential
Okay.
general. So if we look to page 1-6, at the top, it's highlighted the intent of this is the general commercial category. Nick, and that was one of the comments he had in his email tonight, was also regarding this, is how we define what commercial land uses are and what, so I need to look at his email, because this was something that he just was saying that to make sure we know what we are saying when we're talking about what a commercial use is. And,
So how are we gonna
was,
define?
well, remember we talked about the definitions in the comprehensive plan, and we were gonna move all those to the land development regulations. So if that's something Stan Tech is gonna work on, then it should be included in the LDRs, the definitions of commercial, industrial, or whatever type of uses that.
Can I just mention, he's not comfortable with having those definitions of the land use categories in the land development regulations, because it is an independent and subordinate document. And his issue is that he does not think that there is a reliable way of knowing, looking at the document as it's sitting before you, what is a commercial use rather than an industrial use, because there isn't a definition of commercial use in the plan anymore.
Are there specific definitions in the Florida statute for each industrial and commercial use?
That's a great question. I don't think
If
so.
there are,
I don't think so,
Yeah.
because local governments are allowed to include within the commercial category their own definition. So I don't think that the Florida statute, and I'm sorry, I gotta pull it up, has a definition of commercial that would trump your definition of commercial, which was in the original plan.
okay, so then we need to go ahead and add that then, if it's not appropriate in the LDR.
I have the definition that you did have, to see if you're comfortable with doing that. I'm not sure you had one. And in fact, if these are in order, I don't think you did, so it's not, well, they're not in alphabetical order. So commercial uses, that are crossed out right now, means activities within land areas which are predominantly connected with the sale, rental, and distribution of products or performance of services.
Okay, anything in your industrial?
Industrial, we didn't have an industrial land use category until Alara added it, so I'm not sure that it'll be in there.
It is,
Oh, it
number
is.
35.
Means the activities within land areas predominantly connected with manufacturing, assembly, processing, or storage of products.
Okay, I think those are both clear. Anybody on the board have an issue with either of those commercial or industrial definitions?
So we just reinsert them, and that would solve Nick's problem.
Okay, do I need to have someone make a motion that we do that?
I think you can wait till the end and just sign off on the future land use element as amended with the definitions of commercial and industrial.
Okay, where are you gonna do that specifically then, Laura?
You wanna put it in intent?
Yeah, we can do that. We can put it in the intent of each of those categories.
Okay. That's fine.
Okay.
Okay, density?
Yes, we added, Linda caught it, was a good catch, that we add no more than 18 units to the acre. So you can be up to 18 dwelling units to the acre, just we had that already in the other categories, it just was omitted here. And of course, the gross is in there again. And to semi-define lodging in this density, such as hotels, motels, and bed and breakfast establishments.
Okay.
This is the yellow highlight on page 1-6.
One question, maybe everybody knows this, but what is the difference between an acre and a gross acre?
So the gross acre will include everything that's inside of that parcel, including rights of way that are going to be dedicated to the city, or easements, or wetlands. Instead of removing those out to calculate the density, the area of the property, they're going to include them.
So that could potentially be an impact if somebody has,
Actually,
Wetlands are
it would be an
included in
impact if it was net
calculations of
of those.
pervious and impervious.
We haven't changed any of your pervious or impervious requirements, but very frequently in gross density, and it used to say jurisdictional wetlands, I was concerned that that could have an impact on somebody's current density because heretofore you included the wetlands within the gross calculation. And so I thought that that may be, backing into a porcupine, unknown impact. So I took out the jurisdictional wetlands.
okay,
And
so let me, as an example, if I have an acre of land and a half of it is wetlands, then I could still build up to 18 units on that.
well, as to that one in particular, that's the commercial, you'd have to build them over the, are you talking about in the commercial category?
I think to answer your question in short is yes. You could, that's how you would calculate the density.
Very many local governments do that as an incentive to preserve the wetlands. Instead of penalize somebody for having them, they say, we're not gonna count them when we count your density.
Okay. What happened to general commercial?
You have to look at the bottom of the page
It's
to
on the,
see.
yeah, it's,
One.
It's on the bottom of
It's
1.5
right
is
here.
where it starts.
Oh, okay.
It's hard to find.
I've got a height question, maybe this was here before, but general commercial where the intent is hotel is 32 feet. 'Cause I'm getting a lot of questions, is Mexico Beach gonna be maintained the way it used to be, but tourist mixed use is 48 feet?
Mhm. That's generally where the hotels and everything are going anyway. They have been. There was a question, apparently Nick was uncomfortable with us reducing the height
Changed it.
from 48 to 32 feet, and we discussed that. In keeping with the general purpose and intent of the comp plan, to retain the footprint that Mexico Beach has had in the past, we haven't had any real large general commercial buildings. In fact, we have very little general commercial buildings to begin with. So if we're gonna try and keep everything down, we need to reduce the possibility of a large general commercial building coming in, and hence the reduction from 48 to 32 feet. Because right now, and this is a question I have when we get going through this, we've only got 3 prime pieces of general commercial property left in this city. So there's not a whole lot of space left. And we don't need 3 really large buildings larger than everything else in the area if that's all we're gonna have. Unless you guys feel different than that now.
I think the other thought, this is Bill, I think
Yeah,
the
Bill.
other thought was that when you drive down 98, we didn't want that to become a tunnel kind of situation where you had tall buildings on both sides as you went down 98. We're trying to keep that open view feeling.
I don't know exactly where the commercial, general commercial pieces are on the map.
I can show you right now.
They're not
Okay, that'd be
hard to-
great if you could.
They're very
point
few.
that out.
yeah.
Isn't there more since
No.
the hurricane?
Well, that's a question I have, that's a question I
I was
have.
in one, I moved to Gulf County because it doesn't exist.
So that,
The building department has a great map.
but that's still a general commercial
It is, right.
spot,
These are the future land use.
and it can be reused as such.
Correct.
So we didn't lose
Okay.
it.
I did not bring my large map with me.
I have a
I've got
small
one.
one.
For use.
I'm trying to understand.
The 3 remaining, there's 1 left over here on 15th. The rest of that general commercial area on 15th is either dense underbrush, which is a swamp, or there's no road for people to get back in here. All the rest of this right in here right now from general is residential, with the exception of 1 piece of property right here, and then all the rest of it is not residential, is swamp or you can't get to it. The 2 good pieces of remaining general commercial on 98, there's one of them right here between the canal and Killer Seafood, and there's another one, and I'm not really sure exactly where it is, I think it's down in here somewhere. Other than that, everything you see in red is either tourist mixed use or residential. So I went down and took each lot individually and marked them off. So that's it, that's all that's left in the next 30.
How big is that property between Killer and the canal?
Same size as Killer's property. Whatever that is.
Yeah.
Killer's got 2 lots. Killer has a parking lot and the business lot's the same size as the other, as, you know, 1/2 of the other 2 lots. So it's not that big a piece of
So
property.
it's not big enough for just somebody to come in and put a big hotel on or anything?
Oh, no, I mean, you could put business there, but you couldn't put anything large
Okay.
there.
So I guess the concern, and I don't wanna speak for Nick, but I can speak for staff, is that this is a significant change to, a comp plan that's been in place for decades. And we were concerned that, there be proper public input to a change that big. And I know that some of the meetings, there was, you know, very few people there. I think many of the meetings, Lisa may have been the only one there. So we just want to make sure that if this is what you guys are recommending to the council, that there be, that this be, you know, it's pointed out and the public understands that change. And that
The
there's-
initial plan for us to do this was that every time we got finished with a section, it would be posted under the news section on the city website. So they would have had an opportunity to review it and make comment at the next meeting. Unfortunately, none of that got posted. So I agree totally with you, they should have the opportunity to review it.
And there's a lot more than 3 now.
Well, that remains to be seen, we've got to
Right.
discuss that later in the meeting. Okay, does anybody else have anything to input as far as 48 versus 32 is concerned?
Well, I was opposed to it, you remember, I voted against that change, and, but I'm along for the run-up.
Okay, Laura?
Yes, page 1-7, just some editorial changes there, nothing contextual. Page 1-8, we added utilities at Nick's request as an allowable use in public institutional, which makes
Okay,
sense.
makes sense.
Page 1-9, just some editorial change there.
Wait a minute, page 1-8, you've got intensity, height, maximum height of properties outside the CCL.
Are we on?
We're on page 1-8 still.
Which number?
I3,
I3.
height.
Height, yes. Yeah, so as you recall, the height was moved to, how we measure that was moved to
Okay,
the front
I'm
of the
just,
element.
this is something that has not been changed recently.
No,
Okay, well, I just saw the blue.
yeah, I'm not sure
Okay, we're just doing
how
yellow.
the colors, it just,
okay.
I think from going one computer to another,
Okay.
it just kind of got, yeah.
Okay, 1-9.
So 1-9, yep, just a small change there at the bottom under development restrictions for preservation. 1-10, still just adding the word gross into the density calculation. 1-11 and 12 is that ordinance that was adopted several years ago but didn't get included into the plan regarding the property on our west side of the city limits. Just an editorial change on 1-14. Skip way ahead to 1-19, which is also just some minor changes. And then 1-21, policy 1.8.10, just adding plan amendments and the word rezoning. And another editorial change at the bottom of that page, and that's really it.
Mr. Chairman,
Can you go back to the CCL
Yes.
line? I don't have the documents that you're looking at. I guess they were passed out at the meeting. I don't have a copy, so I don't know what you're talking about. But
Sure.
you mentioned something about a change on the CCL. Is that the one that we
No.
changed regarding the floor height versus the DEP line?
That's what, yeah, that hasn't changed since we discussed it.
Right.
It's just what, as we
Okay,
discussed.
that's all right, okay.
Just to make a note,
Okay.
Linda had made a recommendation, we actually, there wasn't a determined number before, but because there was some information that sometimes it's 17.1 feet, sometimes it's 15 feet, it varies, it's not a constant number in Mexico Beach, and that's why they wanted to refer to just whatever DEP decided it needed to be.
Right. The issue that I.
Right, that's the way we,
Right.
that's the way we wrote it. The DEP would set the line, and then the 32 feet would start from the DEP line, not the first finished floor like it had been in the past, because we had people going above the DEP line several feet and then starting the first finished floor.
The issue that I had raised with regard to the height was that we are gonna get new FEMA maps eventually, and I thought for clarification that it might be helpful to let people know that it's not 32 feet from the road if you are starting with your base flood elevation above that. It would be 32 feet above base flood elevation. Now, there is no height restriction seaward of the control line. DEP doesn't care, but Mexico Beach does. So if you, it isn't that you're gonna have elevated structures seaward of the control line and then everything else 32 feet above the curve of the road adjacent to the lot. Potentially, you're gonna have, because the base flood elevation is incorporated into the building code, the Florida building code, and your land development regulations already have an additional 1 foot above base flood elevation, that you're gonna measure the 32 feet, not from the road, but from the base flood elevation plus 1, or if you change it to plus 2, you might
That's not the way it's
consider that.
written now, though.
No, when you talked about this was something that you all decided amongst yourselves, that you were concerned about the heights changing throughout the city based on where the property was. So it's a policy decision on how you want to go with it.
Well, if you think about it, and I'm just going to give a hypothetical that, this isn't likely, but if the base flood elevation was 10 and you added plus 2, you would have taken up the first 12 foot of that structure by air with no structure. If you intend that, as opposed to 32 feet above the base flood elevation plus, then that's not reflected here.
Yeah, I think I like the way it is.
The whole intent was to stop these, this was all before the storm, of course, to stop the buildings that were going up so high. And I thought what had been decided was whatever DEP said you had to build up, and each lot is different. You had to build up a certain amount, and then you could go 32 feet above whatever it was. So it would vary, but it would keep these people from going.
What I'm talking about, landward of the control line, within an area that will have to have an elevation, you're potentially.
Do we know what that elevation is yet?
No, we do not know.
They have not come, do we have an expected date on this?
We're hoping we'll get
So, for
preliminary maps
example-
this week.
Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, so for example, what you're saying is that now, in current flood zone X, that most of them are wiped out, that might go to 4 feet or 12 feet, or pick a number, then it's gonna be 32 feet above that line, or 32 feet plus 2 above
Right,
that
but
line that's coming up. Is that what we're talking about?
That's
I-
Not the
we're
way
talking
it's
about
written.
changing
Yeah.
it to, yes.
Yeah, I was recommending a change
Yeah.
Yes.
so that people who could right now, if they're no longer in X, my suspicion is that these maps might have people who are in X today, but will not be in X under the new maps.
And it's
Will be AE or VE. And so my suggestion was to let those people not count the air, the pilings, if you will, and then do their 32 feet. You have, if you don't use that as that, you have several on-grade properties that have multiple stories, and you're gonna eliminate that.
Enough to be
Yeah,
allowed,
yeah.
enough to be allowed to do.
And that's my concern from the standpoint of the city's potential liability.
So
Yeah.
if you're inside the CCCL, you get your full 32 feet. If you're outside the CCCL, you guys have taken, with your change, you've taken away, if somebody has to raise their own 3 feet,
I understand.
but then they're less than 32 feet, so you're penalizing people for something they have no control over on your 32 feet.
And you're not allowing for use of the
Well,
property.
when you were
so-
considering this, it was a whole different
Oh, yeah,
environment.
we totally different
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah.
That wasn't changing.
Right.
It wasn't even
So-
thought back.
The change
Yeah,
would read
yeah.
what?
Do you have my suggested change there?
So,
Okay, I have
I
it.
can
I can
get
get it.
it, I don't have it with me.
I sent it to, no, it's in the comp plan. Can you get me to my, give me to my, desktop.
I mean, we have homes today that have that issue, right? They're in flood zones and they're required to,
Let me see if I have that with me.
like the unnumbered A has to raise it 3 feet above
Transportation
the
element.
highest adjacent grade.
So then,
Okay,
as of today, if somebody lost their home that was at the current height, it's possible that when they build back, that they
Okay,
will
here
not
it
be
is.
able to build back.
Not under this
The same
change.
number of.
Mr. Chairman, I found my language, and I'm not trying to wordsmith it, but let me give you the
Okay.
concept. As described in this plan, height for properties landward of the control line within zone X,
Today,
shall be measured from 1 foot above the crown of the road directly adjacent to the property. If you're still in X, it's 32 feet from the crown of the road, just like you have here.
Okay.
If there is more than one road, the same thing that you have here. Height for properties landward of the control line within zone AE or VE on the FEMA 2018 flood insurance rate map shall be measured from the base flood elevation. I'm reading language that I,
Hey, okay.
I don't think that was.
shall be measured from the base flood elevation indicated on the FEMA flood map and regulations pertaining thereto. And then the other one is seaward of the control line.
Okay,
which
so
is
2
fine.
feet doesn't come into the people
I
that go from the
amend it
base. No, I
because
don't
at
think,
the-
I don't
at
think
the
we need
time-
to.
Well, your code has a 1 foot already that this doesn't account for. So it should say the 1 foot as well. I mean, there's no reason to take away the 1 foot. It's an equity issue to me for people who were in X before and won't be in the future, that they
So
don't
you can
just get,
build the
take
same home if they
the
want
same
to.
home.
Yeah,
It'll just be elevated.
okay, that
Appears.
makes sense.
Right,
Okay, and so
yep.
we'll get to a question, and we'll talk about this because of the moratorium, we're in a lickety-split hurry on all this because we'd like to get the comp plan put in place while we're working on the land development regulations and making sure that they match. If you recommend that you increase the 1 foot to 2 feet, for example, we'll have time to go back and put the 2 feet in the policy instead of the 1. That's just an example of how we will be moving contemporaneously, consecutively, and all together with the land development regulations and the comp plan.
Comments from the board?
There's,
Do we have any,
just for thought purposes, inside the CCL line, there is no 1 foot from the DEP line. So I don't see any reason to go landward of the CCL line 2 feet if the people inside the CCL don't have that foot.
That, when we get to that, that's a good comment, and board will deliberate on that as well. And not today. Today, on the land development regulations, we want to put before you, these are the issues that we would like you to think about. We're gonna need some extra meetings. I know that's difficult in December, but we're going to need you to agree to some additional meetings so that you have time to talk about it, think about it, put something on the table that you're comfortable with recommending to the council. In our schedule, which we'll get to later, we have you making a recommendation on these land development regulations to the council in early January so that they have time to both do a transmittal hearing in December, an adoption hearing on the comp plan, and 2 hearings on the land development regulations before February 8th, which is my date of when I think the moratorium expires.
Why do we have to wait on the comp plan? We were close to having the comp plan
No,
completed. It seemed
You-
like we could just go ahead and move on that.
yes, sir, yes, sir. The council has not transmitted all of these elements to the Department of Economic Opportunity. So we have you making a recommendation to the council, I hope next week, on the whole thing, after everybody has had a chance to look at it, and make a recommendation to them, and then they'll take it up the following week for a transmittal hearing. And then we'll send it off to the Department of Economic Opportunity, it'll come back. We can get expedited review from the Department of Economic Opportunity. They have made that promise to the city manager already, and then they will adopt the comp plan while they're moving.
The only problem with this, though, we've not had an opportunity to announce this to the public. And what's the minimum amount of time it has to be done?
Your hearing for the comp plan will be December 17th.
It had to, because
And we wanna have a workshop that same night, so.
So that's when you present it to the board.
That's when that's when the P and Z board approves it
Makes a vote.
and votes to recommend it to the council.
Okay, so then the next meeting would be, next council meeting would be presenting it
somebody
to the board.
changed it.
Yes, the council
Based
meeting,
on that.
hearing, we'll present it to them, and then their transmittal hearing will be January 8th. I'll send this out to everyone, but these are the days.
Okay,
We would like to have another workshop with you guys to begin the LDR discussions on the 17th. We can do
The
one, I'm sorry, the 10th. And then on the 17th, we'll continue that discussion, but you'll also finalize the comp plan with Laura and vote to send that to the council.
My bad, I
Is
didn't
that
realize we
time also
lived.
on Monday?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think they're all Mondays. The 7th of January, you'll have a P and Z hearing on the LDR recommendation, so whatever you get through on in December, we'll present that.
Have we had any preliminary talks with FEMA yet about how big the changes are gonna be for our flood map?
We have had so many discussions with FEMA, you don't even
Twice
want
a
me to
week.
begin. But, we should have the preliminary maps. What FEMA's doing is they're giving us what they consider best available maps, because maps aren't gonna be final for a couple of years. So we'll get those best available maps. We'll be looking at the surge, the wind load, all of the data from FEMA, and we'll have technical experts to help us look at some of that, and then we'll be making a decision as to what the city's gonna do with base flood elevation and wind load.
Is there any chance that FEMA or anybody, any other entity could come in and say, sorry, you can't build houses at this particular location anymore?
They don't have a zone of prohibition. Usually they have a zone, these height regulations, various, I don't think that would.
So, like 38th, all those streets down there on the seaside, I mean,
They're just going to build higher.
I think the only thing they could do or not do is decide whether or not you'll be eligible for the federal flood
okay,
insurance.
but they could come in and make it very difficult to build unless you just come in there with a pocket full of cash and accept the risk.
No, not FEMA, no. I mean,
No.
they just, as Laura said, depending on how you build, it may affect the rate on your flood insurance, but FEMA's not gonna tell people what they can and cannot build in the city of Mexico Beach.
You could be removed from the flood insurance program.
Yeah, you might
That's
not be
possible,
eligible for
but-
flood insurance, but that would be.
Federal flood insurance, you
Right.
might be only eligible
Right.
for private flood insurance.
Was there a prior change to the FEMA flood map that the city did not adopt?
Well, it was going through the process of updating the maps just before the storm. So we were about to get new flood maps, but now,
The last audit was in 2017 of our flood maps, and they were working on that. It takes 2 to 3 years to get final maps, so they were still working on the maps from 2017, and I don't think they had been updated
Probably 10 years.
probably at least 10 years, so
and there was some changes in it.
we'll see changes that they saw in 2017, and then we'll see their best available data for the storm.
Okay, so do you have her recommended wording on the?
I have it in an email, yes.
But I will stand corrected on the +1 or +2. +1 is in the LERs right now, so I will work with Alara to make sure the language is okay.
And isn't the +1 just the crown of the road, or is it does
No, it
refer to
says
base
base
flood
flood
elevation?
+1.
Okay, does anybody on the board have a problem with the proposed wording for the A and Z flood zones?
1.1.2 is the policy, it would change that.
Yes.
So go ahead and draft that and put that in, the changes you make along. Was that the last one you had? Is that one?
Yes, sir, I
Okay,
have a
Linda,
couple
you
more
said-
from Nick.
Okay,
Okay. The email is to Alara. He says, "We discussed maintaining restrictions on mobile homes despite similar restrictions would not be allowed for manufactured homes and buildings. This is not incorporated in the draft you have in front of you. Also, if it does get incorporated, the comp plan will need definitions that differentiate manufactured buildings from mobile homes." The gist of it is, and I wasn't privy to the conversation between Alara, but between Nick and Laura and I think if he wants those definitions back in the plan, we can put them, I don't know what language he's talking about was removed. Alara, do you?
So we had a discussion on Thursday, and we were going through the changes as we were working, and then I sent it to him on Friday to double check to make sure I included everything, which I guess I got this email on my drive over, so I have not had a chance to study it, I apologize. But if restrictions on mobile homes despite that similar restrictions would not be allowed for manufactured home buildings. Okay. We were talking about, you know how we had this crossed out language about mobile homes are prohibited in the future
What
in this category?
section
This
are
is
we
the first
talking?
page. Yeah. And I think we had it in another category also. It's also in it's also in the high density residential mobile homes are prohibited. So,
I think it's
so let me,
usually-
I think it's
yeah.
specified, yeah, for him to clarify. Because I think his concern is the difference between a mobile home and a manufactured home, and we talked about that.
Yeah.
2 or 3 meetings and how to handle that, so, let me get with him.
Okay, that'd be great. He asks that the PNC, let us know if you wish to include lodging, to include an RV park. That is the allowable uses under tourist commercial. Where, let's see, that would be page.
1-4, what 1-4?
Yes.
Yes.
For commercial.
Do you want that to include an RV park?
would that not be more appropriate in a tourist mixed use?
I don't know whether it is mixed use necessarily.
Yeah, I thought the mobile home parks, RV parks are commercial.
This is tourist commercial is, can't use it under general commercial because of the limitation on residential
Right.
except incorporated. So it would be either tourist commercial.
It needs to be in there somewhere.
Well, we have it, it's just, I think his question is whether or not you want it to be considered a lodging establishment. If you wish lodging to include an RV park.
Okay, so that would be under general commercial?
He's
Tourist commercial.
referring to tourist
Tourist
commercial.
commercial.
Where on allowable uses part 5, it lists lodging, and his question is, do you want the lodging to include an RV park by definition?
That makes sense.
Currently, the RV parks are according to this map, they're in general commercial.
Yeah, that's what it should be.
And it is listed specifically, RV park is an allowable use in general commercial.
Thanks, Alaric. That's exactly what he wants. Do you want it also to be listed as a specific allowable use under tourist commercial?
No.
No. Okay, that's the answer. And then please ask the P and Z board if it intends for the recreation category to include large buildings that otherwise fit the list of allowable uses, such as indoor sports complexes, bowling alley, boat barns. They appear allowed under the current language, under recreation.
So what, I think his question is, what do you want to be considered allowable under the recreation category? Because right now, the way it's described, it's as if it were more of an outdoor camping, golfing, walking, bicycling, hiking, but his argument, and I agree with him, is that it could also include bowling alleys, boat barns, sports complexes, and it's a policy decision as to what kinds of uses you may or may not want to restrict the recreation category to.
I don't have a problem with that one way or the other, to tell you the truth.
Well, otherwise they're
I
gonna
think-
be in commercial, aren't they?
Mhm.
And but since you have
Yeah.
0 as your density, it's not an issue of, RV parks or things like that. It's gonna be just separate sports complexes. Could be a,
I think a bowling
Lifestyle
alley
thing.
is not necessarily recreational, if it
issue.
has a bar and a restaurant and stuff like that. I think it's commercial. Our thought on recreational, I think, was purely kind of passive recreational outside just what you talked about.
but he's pointing out that these things would not be excluded under recreation unless you clarify that you can't have them.
Well, with 0 density, how can they be?
Well, they're not,
Excluded.
that's an intensity thing. It's got a height limitation of 32 feet. So,
Well, let's eliminate them then.
okay.
That's my opinion. I'm just one person on the board, but I don't think that's what we were thinking of when we were thinking recreation.
Now's a good time to
Read
be
those
clear.
examples again, boat
Is
barns.
Bowling
Okay.
alleys.
Indoor
boat
sports
barns.
complex, bowling alley, boat barns, etc. Like a climbing gym would be high.
We had a proposal a couple of years ago to have a kids amusement park.
Well, that's definitely recreational.
Well, with parking and the noise and stuff like that, it fits in a commercial category as well.
But remember that recreation is open to the public. It's public, it's not bowling alley, that's private.
Well, here it is,
Well,
public and
that's
private.
Public and private, active and passive recreational uses.
Well, the intent is recreation areas open to the public.
Well,
Well, it could be open to the public. I'm thinking of a development that creates a private park, but you have guests or parties, you could rent it to.
If you're taking in money, I think it's commercial then.
I think it's
A bowling
commercial
alley, a
also.
boat barn, all the things we talked about are commercial, they're revenue producing. The recreation stuff we were talking about is more passive.
So we would wanna, so would you consider camping as something you would pay for? You would have to
I don't think
eliminate
you can
that.
camp
No.
for free most places.
Well, depends on what
I
this
don't think
public
we got
land
any
is
campsites, but
Well, we use camping, golfing.
Golfing is something you pay for?
Looks like,
Yeah, it's open to the
if I'm
public,
reading
though.
our strike-throughs, the original was limited public
And private.
and private, is that the original?
Yep.
Well, actually, the red is something that I added, the black is what was, all that was there originally. So there wasn't much to it.
So it was just limited,
It didn't have really, it just had the intent, that's all it was.
gotcha, so that was added.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the intent is that's public. But you do have, that would also be, if you have a subdivision and they build a park, that's considered recreation, or is that still?
If it's a land use category, yeah, this is, Yeah, this would be, if they went into the subdivision and took a piece out and gave it the green color on the map, then it would be recreation.
Okay. But otherwise, it's just their property
just part of the
that's
subdivision.
private and that's what they do, so, yeah, I think.
If it's a PUD, they have to provide recreation.
Right, I'm just saying, I think to make it simple is just, you just limit it to public land. And then you don't have to deal with, because that's how it was originally, it was public land only.
Yeah.
So it goes in the general commercial then, so.
And all the other would go into general commercial if you left this
Well,
as
I would
public.
just say allowable use, we would just refer to public lands then and the allowable uses and talk about walking, golfing, not golfing, bicycling, hiking. Would you want to include sports fields and courts? Probably.
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Yeah, you'd solve this if you limited it to public.
Yeah. Anybody, any other board member have a comment?
Is there anything
So
on
we're
your map
striking
that is
private,
currently
yeah.
private, that's recreation?
For striking private, it's gonna still say uses may be for-profit recreational activities.
I would say public lands that are used for active and passive recreational uses.
Read.
Well, I would continue on, but
What are you gonna state again now?
public lands that are used for active and passive recreational uses, such as
Okay,
all the rest. Then I would recommend you scratch that last sentence.
That's the one I was asking.
uses may be for nonprofit. or
For profit.
For profit.
That's all, uh-huh, that's it.
Okay, what else did you have?
That's it.
I've got a couple issues that, with what was given to the city. I didn't see the, purpose and intent section included.
For tonight,
No, I mean, what
Oh.
was,
I need to get with you, I need to find out, look into that.
because I mean, I didn't get it. I don't have access to the thumb drive.
Well, yes, you don't, okay, I thought we put it all in that thunder.
Well, I don't have a thumb drive, the city has a thumb drive.
Oh, okay,
So I don't know for a fact whether or not it's on there.
it's okay.
But that's the heart of what we did. Every decision we made was based on that section of the comp plan. So I mean, that's
Well,
the
it's,
heart of what it is we're doing.
yeah, and you guys have already voted on that, but yeah, I'll make sure,
And I think the council already has too. They haven't?
no.
No. Council hasn't.
The council's only voted on the coastal element.
Okay.
By the way, just for clarification, instead of having a separate adoption process for just coastal, since that was already transmitted by the council, we're just going to drop that and adopt the whole.
Yeah, now my understanding is the state didn't get the coastal.
Yeah, they did, they've already sent it back to us.
They've sent comments back.
But
Or-
they did
They got the
Comments.
transmittal version back in May.
Okay.
and they responded with comments, edits, something.
As far as I know, I didn't
They
respond.
responded with, looks good to us.
Okay.
Which one did they send back that they asked for edits? That wasn't that one? I thought we got something back for edits, that's what I was trying.
We had a complimentary review before we officially transmitted, and we made the edits that they
Gotcha,
requested.
gotcha.
Yep.
Okay, now, one of the other things we talked about when we were doing this, in the current comp plan, I've got 2 8x10 pages here of weasel words, where it says something like, the city will coordinate, doesn't say who, doesn't say when. At appropriate times, the city will plan, but it doesn't say what appropriate times are. And in order to keep from dropping the ball, we need to put that somewhere, who's responsible and when they're responsible for doing it. Now, your advice was to put it in the LDR.
My advice was to keep it broad in the comprehensive plan, so that if you have a point person that you want to identify later on, you can, but I don't
somewhere we have to put on paper who's responsible for what and when they're responsible for it, or we're gonna drop the ball like we've been dropping the ball in the past. Because everybody can say, it's not my job, it's so-and-so's job. So we need to be able to define who's responsible for what and when they're responsible for it. Now, it may not be our job, it may be the council's job to do that, but somebody has to do that.
I agree with Laura. I think you keep your comp plan broad, and when we go through the LDR, if there are areas where you think somebody's head needs to be painted red in the LDR, then we'll figure that out and we'll make that a policy that the city will adopt. We have to be careful putting names and things like that in your LDR, but we can refer to a policy that then the staff can adopt with council approval.
Or just have a separate policy
That
or
way
something,
the
but something in writing needs to be done.
Right, and that's what I mean, a separate policy that can be a living, breathing document that we change as staff needs change. Because you can't tie us to.
Especially with a small city,
Yeah,
changes
yeah,
probably
exactly. So-
as
we have-
availability moves around.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree that the LDR is too hard to change to put it in there, but somebody does to do it, and it needs to go somewhere.
There is very often a work plan in which, because things get prioritized, there could be 20 of these that say, I'll do this, and then you can't do them all at the same time. So you say, let's do this in the first 6 months of 2020 or whatever. So I think that is a separate document that we can work on once we have a full list. It'd be good to have that list.
I've got by page and by section on
Okay.
what it is. Okay, another issue that comes to mind too is we voted, in the future for general commercial, only to allow residential if they go vertical in general commercial. With all the buildings being destroyed on 98 that are in a commercial zone, which are residential in nature, are we gonna allow them to go back and build a home on that, or are we gonna limit that to commercial property only? That's something we've gotta think about. Because I know that all those homeowners are gonna wanna rebuild.
And I have another issue somewhat related to that I brought up several meetings ago. And page 1.2, number 6, houses of worship must be located on a collector or arterial roadway. I asked you about the Methodist Church at the end of Paradise. That is actually in a residential zone. And at the time I asked you that, far from thinking that it was going to be destroyed. But at this point, the way it's written here, they cannot rebuild that church. Is that correct?
Is it, what street is it on?
It's right at the end of Paradise Valley. Look out the front door.
Is it-
That's a Methodist church down there that's sitting in a, remember,
Residential
that's sitting in a residential section right now. And it, from what I understand, cannot be rebuilt.
And it's actually designated as residential general on the future land use
That's
map,
what,
not it's
you
something
know
else.
what you told me, Adrian? It was designated residential.
I think that's what it is, and that's on that.
It's 27.
Yep.
That's residential. That's something we need to discuss, because all these people that are there and destroyed are gonna wanna rebuild and do what they had then. Are we gonna allow them to do that? Or are we gonna refer to the zoning map and say, we're gonna have to stick to the zoning map? And that's something that I would say, take home with you tonight and think about. If you got neighbors or something, talk to them about it, because
Was it?
that's a major decision that's gonna have to be made right there.
And
I don't know, I don't know what percentage.
Yeah,
Is it
Part of it is and
substantially
part of it is not.
Hold on,
Is it substantially damaged? That's a parcel as a whole.
I would guess, Tanya, wouldn't you think it's more than 50?
I haven't seen the SDE on the church, so I can't
Could be
say. But we have an item in the list, on the LDR list, to look at non-conforming structures, and that's what that falls under. So we will be capturing and making decisions on
I
that.
have
in
nothing
any
to do, I've never been in the church, I don't know, but I know it's there, I know I brought it up.
Right.
And I can see in the future where the church, it looks to me, I mean, I'm right across the street, I see every Sunday, very few members anyway, but it's their church. And according to this, it's gone. if my estimate of the damage on that building, it's really in bad shape.
We can't revive it in the land development regulations if the comp plan prohibits it. So now is the time for us to be talking about it.
And another way to tackle that is just change the map. Because this pertains to properties that are designated residential general. If it's a public institutional use, maybe it needs to be designated that, and then it
Okay,
wouldn't be
so
a
then that
problem.
means we would have to go and rezone it.
You have to replan it, you have to change it, there needs a future
Just map
land use
amendments.
map amendment.
Okay.
And that might be the answer.
And this is something that I really would like to get public input on also, what we're discussing here. So the next meeting we have, if the city could put out, announce we're having the meeting and what we're gonna be discussing, because I guarantee you homeowners that are currently in general commercial or people like the church are gonna wanna attend that meeting and know what's going on, so they've got something to say about it.
And you have to think that there are, and it's happened in Panama City, churches that pop up in homes, just little churches that pop up in
I
homes.
agree
So
with this.
that was the reason for the policy, but if it's a bona fide church, then it should be designated as such on the map.
Public institutional.
Well, the question has to be asked, at least from my standpoint. This is a huge issue that Jim just brought up, whether or not to allow residential rebuild in what's zoned commercial. And there are a number of other things. My question is, understanding that people want to build back immediately, what is the absolute 90-0 rush to get this done in these 90 days? Because this will determine everything about Mexico Beach from here on. So why is there such a rush? I understand people want to build back, but you are flying through this, from my standpoint, like bats out of hell, and it is too much too fast. And it's going to be there's not nearly enough public participation. Perhaps that's something, well, I won't say that. But 90 days to get this done seems like it is way too fast to consider something of this magnitude, because the entire town depends on this.
Lisa, let me give you my point of view on that.
Mhm.
If it was left up to me, we'd be meeting 3 hours a day to get this done. I think it's that important for the homeowners and the people in this town to get settled and know what they've got. There are a lot of very hurting people out here
There's a lot of angry
that will
people.
be waiting
A lot
on
of
the
angry
document.
That think 90's too long.
I understand that, folks, I really do, but at the same time, listening to these discussions and seeing how fast you're pushing this through tells me that there's gonna be some major mistakes made.
Well,
Yeah, I would say you can work smart and you can work fast at the same time, and
Mexico Beach
I
has never been known for
I
that.
cannot justify dragging this out for people, and we're gonna work through them, we're gonna capture them. Every one of the non-conforming structure issues has a solution. And we just quickly identified one for churches in 10 minutes. So these are things that we can work through, that we can, this board can discuss and solve quickly, because people are ready to get back to their lives. And I think we have to do everything we can to make sure that happens quickly. And that's the 90-day moratorium, and we're gonna work towards it.
Okay, let me refer to a
This is
minute.
Bill, and just want to jump in on this.
Go ahead, Bill.
I understand what Lisa's saying, and I agree with that, but I think overriding that is the fact that the town needs to get the tax base back going. It needs to happen, and the longer we wait on giving decisions, the more people are gonna decide that they're not gonna rebuild in Mexico Beach, they're gonna go someplace else. Because they've got the money in their hands, they need a place to live, and I think we just need to move as quickly and as diligently as we can. And I totally agree that we're not gonna get there by meeting, every 3 weeks for 2 hours, and something like that. There's gonna have to be some blood and sweat on our part to make it happen, and I'm willing to do that, but, time is of the essence, I think, to move forward, and I think we just gotta be diligent enough to get it done. If we make a mistake or we bobble the ball, doesn't mean we can't go back and change the LDR if we've done something that we wanna undo. That's what we are, we're a board, we change things. So that's my feeling.
Okay, one of the things I want the board members to think about when you're going back and thinking about the church in residential area and the residences in general commercial zones. One of the values that we came up with is what we want to do, accomplish with the city, is ensure property rights consistent with the general welfare. So you have to define what you think the general welfare is and how somebody's ability to use his property either conflicts or supports the general welfare. Because that's basically what we're looking at here.
Is there
And I'm not asking for a position now, I just want you to think about it when you go home, because that's a decision we're gonna have to make.
Is there a legal component to this? Let's just say I owned a home that was built on a general commercial lot, and it was blown away by the hurricane. Can I come back and say, okay, I already had this house here, and, through an act of God, it was wiped off the map. I've got a right to build it back.
It would be considered under the law a non-conforming use. It would be in the wrong land use category. And short of changing the map to put it in the right land use category, or the one that they wanted, that they had before, then the city, if you don't change this language, the city would have to do something.
So we would have to go back and take each one of those properties and revote to allow those people to.
Well, not
Well, no.
necessarily, we could change the zoning map to make that residential category.
No, you'd have to change the land use map
Well, I thought-
and the zoning map,
Right,
not just the
okay,
zoning.
zoning.
But may I suggest, and I
Right.
can work with Alara and Aaron on this, we can, right now, your general commercial is, you can't have residential unless it's above
Yes.
commercial. You might wanna consider, a little, an out, on that language about structures existing prior to October 10th in this category, et cetera. You might want to, that would mean that you would, for new commercial, they couldn't have residential unless they had, you see what I mean? And so, right now, that language, it doesn't exist, and why would you have thought of it before October 10th? But we're thinking about it now, and that would help those folks. You wouldn't have to have a map amendment then, and we could structure it so that existing structures in commercial, general commercial, prior to October 10th could continue as a lawful use.
Well, Laura, didn't you give us, I had some numbers, but my book was washed away in my office, but Mexico Beach commercial, as a percentage of total, is lower than most.
I think it was less than 5% of the area of the city. And like, when you have a food desert, because you don't have a grocery store, you have to go to Port St. Joe or Callaway.
So we need to preserve commercial if we want commercial services to come in.
Or get new commercial, or develop, make the commercial area that we have zoned now more attractive, because what we have right now is not attractive.
Or you can encourage those that lost their houses in commercial areas to put commercial on the bottom, build on top, and put your height back to 48 feet. To allow them to do it.
A lot of people probably wouldn't want that option, because they wouldn't wanna have
Commercial.
an empty storefront on the front, on the bottom.
Okay, that's all I have. Do you have some other things that we need to consider, Tanya?
The only thing I would suggest is, the non-conforming structure issue on the LDR list that's in your packet. These are all the issues that have come up. You guys try to tackle that one first, starting next week. Start going through those, because those are the ones that we absolutely 100% need to nail down before the moratorium ends.
Is that what you emailed today? Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the packet. Did we send, yeah, I think I'm.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's what we're talking about in part here, we're talking about what you've got now in the general
Yeah,
welfare.
and so I think that, and that'll give you time through December, if we need to reschedule those transmittal hearings, we can. If you wanna make some more edits to your comp plan as you work through non-conforming, that would just be my suggestion.
Do we have a list of non-conforming
Of items that are non-conforming.
of
No.
structures? and
No,
everything?
no. It's too many to even think about.
I mean, we can give you categories, but not area.
Yeah, but that's why, to me, that it's imperative that we get public input on this, so we're not just sitting down in a vacuum. And that's why, if anything the city can do to let the public know about what we're gonna be doing at our next meeting, we need as most people we can possibly get to get this discussion ginned up, so we can do what's best for the city.
You also might want to think about non-conforming uses versus non-conforming structures. You could allow the use to go forward while making the rebuilt structure match what is required in your zoning district.
I highly encourage that.
Could you explain that a little more?
Yeah, a little bit more.
So you've got, on a piece of property, you've got the use, and then you've got the building that's built there. And both of them can be non-conforming. So if the building is destroyed, you could allow the non-conforming use to continue while making the rebuilt building match what is required in your zoning district.
For example, setbacks or height or something, the envelope of the structure is a non-conforming or conforming structure. But the use would be what the land use category allows it to be used as.
I think that's a very valid avenue of discussion. However, know that some of the structures can't be rebuilt on as that use because it's gonna be with the setbacks. I mean, right now I'm guessing because all this comprehensive planning stuff came in long after many structures in Mexico Beach were already here, and so they weren't non-conforming because there was nothing to conform to. So now you talk about setbacks, etc. So even structures, you're gonna have a way for folks to figure out what can they build on the lot, even if the use is allowed.
So are you saying if it's zoned commercial and there was a house there, and they want to build a house back, that they are to build to the commercial?
No. To
To
build
the new residential standard.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So you could have a business that's operating out of a house, essentially.
No, you
No,
have just a
no.
house.
Modification.
Just have a house.
Yeah, there's a lot of residential in the commercial category. So
Okay.
both of these issues we'll tackle.
Anything more on the comp plan? Okay, let's move on to overview of LDR updates.
That's just your list. Take one look at it.
So that's at the back of the handout today. And planning and zoning workshop on LDR changes.
Next Monday.
Same time?
Yes, but I don't understand, do you want us to address what needs to be changed in the LDR? Or are you gonna give us some changes to the LDR?
It's in the list of things we'd like for you guys to address during this first phase,
Got it.
it's in your packet. And the non-conforming, I think the next to the last bullet captures the non-conforming.
And that calendar is just your schedule for the process of approval of the LDR income.
Okay. I want to add to that the changes that we've discussed for the next meeting, changes we've discussed tonight, Laura.
Sorry?
If, I want to add to that, in addition to looking at these LDR issues here, if you can go ahead and update the draft and then let
Yes.
us look at that at this meeting also. Okay.
Then the following Monday after that, you will formally transmit the future land use element. And hold your finger.
So one of the bullets is treatment of mobile homes, manufactured homes, and modular buildings, and clarify distinction. What do you mean by treatment of?
Where is the transmittal here?
They are prohibited in some districts, allowed in others. We'll change the LDRs to be consistent with the definitions that are gonna be in the comp plan about mobile home, manufactured home, modular home, and clarify in which districts they are allowed and prohibited, which zoning districts.
So you will have those definitions.
Yes, they'll be consistent with what's in the comp plan.
Adrian, let me go back to you again. You're saying the 17th is when we give, when do we present, when do we transmit the comp plan to the board? The 17th? 17th, okay.
So you can review it next Monday. Have it ready, or you can wait till the 17th.
And that,
We didn't want to schedule.
okay, got it.
We'll never make that.
Schedule of workshops,
That's right, you won't.
which is what we've got here.
We just put 2 on here, because, just to, set some
Okay.
markers, but you're gonna need more than that, I'm sure.
Well, once we meet next week, we'll know where we stand. And then if we need to schedule another one, we can.
Your hearing for the 17th has been advertised and it's already out to press.
Okay, yeah, but are people really aware of what we're meeting about and how important it is for them to put their 2 cents in?
It's in the advertisement, so.
We can put it out on Facebook as well, though, because there are a ton of people who are following that stuff, and
Okay, I
And
think
I
that you
think
probably
we
get a lot
need
more
a
input from
very-
there than you would from.
And you'll have 30 people on this phone tomorrow,
Okay.
because that's what we would have to vote on our council meeting, so.
And I think it will be important at the next meeting then that it's presented in a way of, here's what we're trying to do, as you said, the purpose and intent, and just talking through that in a way that the public can wrap their minds around, because there's been a lot of changes and discussion that the public has not been privy to. So somehow we have to explain it and also keep it simple enough that people can understand it.
We luckily have a PIO for this process now, so this is good.
Yeah, but I just wanna correct something that you just said. The public has been privy to everything you guys have
Exactly.
done. It's all been done in public meetings. It's just, people may not have realized what the discussion involved, so they were not there, but it has all been done in public.
Right, but now it takes on great import
Yeah.
because their home has been
People
blown
weren't paying
away.
attention.
It was not relevant to them at that time.
Can you get the
Suddenly
schedule
it's-
to Alex and to, Bill?
Yes,
The schedule will also be in the newspaper this Thursday.
Okay.
Will these meetings be held here?
Yes.
What's the status of the other place?
Toast.
it's total. We went over and looked at Casuna. We'd like to use their clubhouse, but it has some damage currently, so we've advised them if they can get the damage fixed there, then we could possibly rent that building for our meetings.
Where's it at?
Casuna, right there on 15th Street, their clubhouse.
When you go around the corner, it's on the left-hand side. Where they
And
built
it's-
all those houses.
It's about the size of the Civic Center, so it would work out well for us. It's ADA accessible, we checked out all of that, so that's what we're hoping, but right now it's not repaired. It needs some ceiling repair work.
Okay, do you have anything else for us?
I don't-
Any board member have any issues? Okay, can I get a motion that either do we amend the comp plan with the changes that we discussed at the meeting today? Can I get a motion?
I make a motion that we amend the comp plan with the changes we discussed today.
A second.
Roll call?
Mr. Bush?
Yes.
Mr. Kerrigan?
Yes.
Mr. Masters?
Yes.
Ms. Metcalf?
Yes.
There being no further business before the board, this meeting is adjourned.
Have you guys had any chats with MediaCom?
Also,
Oh,
look into.
yeah.
What's going on?
What is the,
Wonderful
what is
television.
I've seen what anybody that can say.
Because we need to
Now it's already out, but I called on them and
Not as